I'm 35M. Every year my family hosts an annual holiday potluck. It's one of those traditions that's been around for as long as I can remember. Everyone brings their best dishes, and we gather at my grandma's house to eat, laugh, and catch up. The food is always amazing. Casseroles, desserts, you name it. Everyone has their signature dish. For me, it's my baked ziti. I'm a 35-year-old guy who can cook decently well, but this dish is my pride and joy. It's the one thing I know the family loves, and I was looking forward to bringing it this year. Now, there's always been a bit of drama surrounding these potlucks, mostly because of my Aunt Linda. She's the type of person who just doesn't contribute. For years, she's shown up empty-handed, usually with some excuse about how she didn't have time or couldn't think of what to make. Meanwhile, she never hesitates to pile her plate high with the best of everything and even pack leftovers to take home. It's been a running joke in the family, but this year, things hit a breaking point. The lead up to the potluck was the usual chaos. Our family group chat was buzzing with messages about what everyone was bringing. My cousins were hyping up their desserts, my mom was talking about her famous green bean casserole, and my uncle was promising to bring his smoked brisket. But Linda? Radio silence. A few people asked her what she was bringing, but she didn't reply. Not a single message. That wasn't unusual, though. Linda always kept quiet until the last minute. I had spent 2 days prepping my baked ziti. I don't mean to brag, but it's a labor of love. Homemade marinara, 3 kinds of cheese, the works. I even bought a new baking dish for it. By the morning of the potluck, I was so excited to share it. Then, about 2 hours before the event, Linda sent a text to the group chat. Sorry, I didn't have time to go to the store. I'll just see you all there. The collective eye rolls. No one said anything outright, but you could feel the frustration. It wasn't like this was a surprise. The potluck happens every year, same time, same place. But that's Linda for you. Always a reason, never a solution. When I arrived at Grandma's, the house was already bustling. The dining table was covered with food, and the smell of all the dishes mixed together was mouth-watering. Everyone was chatting and catching up, and for a while it was easy to forget about Linda's inevitable antics. I placed my baked ziti on the table and grabbed a spot in the living room to relax. Then, about 45 minutes after the start time, Linda made her grand entrance. She swept in with her oversized purse and loud, cheerful greetings, acting like she wasn't late. Of course, she was empty-handed. No dish, no drinks, nothing. She made a beeline for the dining table, grabbed a plate, and started loading it up. Not just a little bit of everything, either. She took heaping portions of every dish, including mine. By the time she was done, there was barely a spoonful of ziti left for anyone else. Everyone noticed, but no one said a word. It's like we were all silently agreeing to avoid confrontation. Cousin Megan, who's usually the one to break the tension, made a half-joking comment about how someone forgot to bring food but didn't forget to bring Tupperware. Linda just laughed it off and kept piling food onto her plate. She didn't even acknowledge the jab. What really pushed me over the edge, though, was when she pulled out her own Tupperware. She started filling it up with leftovers, my ziti included. And this wasn't just a small portion to take home. She packed enough to feed a family of 4. At one point, she even muttered something about how her kids would love this later. Her kids, mind you, weren't even there. By now, the room had gone quiet. People were exchanging looks, but still, no one said anything. Grandma tried to lighten the mood with one of her usual jokes, but even she seemed uncomfortable. Linda, on the other hand, acted like nothing was wrong. She carried on, completely oblivious to the growing tension around her. As I sat there watching her shamelessly pack up food, I felt my patience snap. For years, we'd all let this slide. Linda had been doing this for as long as I could remember, and no one ever called her out. I decided then and there that this time would be different. I wasn't going to let it go. By the end of the night, the atmosphere was awkward, to say the least. People were clearly fed up, but Linda didn't seem to notice or care. As she left, carrying her Tupperware full of everyone else's food, I couldn't help but feel like this was the last straw. Something had to be said, and I was going to be the one to say it. Looking back, I realized this was the moment everything started to unravel. What happened next turned our once close family gatherings into a full-blown drama that I still can't believe unfolded the way it did. But that's a story for another update. Update 1. By the time dessert rolled around, the atmosphere was strained. Linda was still making rounds at the food table, adding slices of pie and scoops of pudding to her plate, all while her Tupperware sat on the side, already full of leftovers. People exchanged glances, some whispered among themselves, but no one said anything outright. It felt like the tension in the room was waiting for a spark. I didn't plan for it to be me, but when Linda sat down at the table with a plate piled high and no acknowledgement of her lack of contribution, I couldn't hold it in any longer. I asked her, as casually as I could manage, why she hadn't brought anything this year. Linda didn't even flinch. She waved it off, saying she'd been going through a lot lately and that the family should cut her some slack. The way she said it, like she was the victim in all of this, set off a chain reaction. It started with cousin Megan, who leaned forward and mentioned that this wasn't exactly a one-time thing. Then Uncle Joe chimed in, recounting the time Linda had promised to bring drinks and showed up empty-handed with a story about a flat tire. At first, Linda shrugged it off, laughing like everyone was overreacting. But as more and more people brought up examples of her taking advantage of the potluck, her demeanor changed. She leaned back in her chair, crossed her arms, and accused everyone of being petty. According to her, we were making the potluck about money instead of family. That's when Megan hit her with the line we were all thinking but hadn't dared to say. You never forget to bring Tupperware, though. A few people chuckled nervously, but Linda didn't take it well. Her face turned red, and she fired back that we were all ganging up on her and that she felt attacked. She even started to tear up, saying it wasn't fair to pile on her when she was already dealing with so much. Grandma, ever the peacekeeper, tried to step in at this point. She told everyone that it wasn't worth ruining the evening over. That family was more important than a few dishes of food. But by then it was too late. The room was divided. Half the family looked uncomfortable, clearly wishing the whole thing would blow over, while the other half sat silently, clearly agreeing with the points being made. I couldn't let it drop. I told Linda it wasn't about the food, it was about respect. If everyone else could find the time to contribute, there was no reason she couldn't, especially considering she never skipped the event or hesitated to take leftovers. That's when she snapped. She stood up, grabbed her bag and Tupperware, and declared she was never coming to another family event again. Then she stormed out, leaving everyone in stunned silence. After she left, the family split into two camps. Some thought I'd gone too far, saying it wasn't worth the drama. Others quietly thanked me for saying what they'd been thinking for years. Grandma was visibly upset, muttering about how she'd hoped the potluck would bring us closer together, not drive us apart. The rest of the evening was awkward, with conversations feeling forced and the once lively chatter now subdued. The real fallout began the next day. Linda left the family group chat and posted a cryptic status on social media about toxic families and how some people only care about rules, not relationships. It didn't take a genius to figure out who she was talking about. The group chat lit up with messages from cousins trying to process what had happened. Some defended her, saying she was probably just overwhelmed. Others said it was about time someone called her out. Then came Grandma's call. She said she was worried about the family dynamic and asked if I could apologize to Linda to smooth things over. I told her I wasn't sure that was the right move, but she insisted it would be better for everyone. I said I'd think about it, but honestly, I wasn't sure I wanted to apologize for something I didn't feel was wrong. A few days later, one of my cousins sent me a screenshot of a text Linda had sent to her friend. In it, Linda was bragging about how she always left the potluck with a week's worth of free meals and how she'd figured out how to work the system without contributing anything. That was the final straw for me. Whatever guilt I'd been feeling evaporated after reading that. This wasn't someone overwhelmed or struggling. This was someone who'd been taking advantage of the family's generosity for years. The potluck tradition has always been about everyone pitching in and sharing the load, and Linda had turned it into her personal buffet. I didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was clear, things weren't going back to how they were. The family dynamic had shifted, and I had a feeling this was just the beginning of the drama. Update 2. After the fallout from the potluck, Grandma decided enough was enough. She called for a family meeting to clear the air and get us back on track. She insisted it wasn't about choosing sides, but about finding a way to move forward. The meeting was scheduled for the following Sunday at her house, the usual spot for all our gatherings. Everyone was invited, including Linda. The buzz around the meeting started days before. In the family group chat, people were speculating about whether Linda would show up. As it turned out, she wasn't planning to. She texted Grandma directly, saying she wasn't ready to face everyone and wouldn't be attending. When word of her refusal spread, reactions were mixed. Some rolled their eyes, saying it was typical Linda. Others said we should give her space. By the time Sunday rolled around, almost everyone else showed up. Grandma kicked things off by reminding us why we were there, to address the tension and find a resolution. For the first few minutes, people were hesitant to speak up. Then Cousin Megan broke the silence, saying what everyone was thinking, that Linda's behavior wasn't just about the potluck, it had been a pattern for years. Once the floodgates opened, stories started pouring out. Uncle Joe mentioned how Linda had once borrowed money from him to fix her car and never paid it back. Another cousin brought up how Linda had promised to help organize a family barbecue a few years ago but backed out last minute, leaving everyone scrambling. The more stories that surfaced, the clearer it became that this wasn't a one-off issue. Linda had been taking advantage of the family's goodwill for years. Grandma sat quietly listening, looking torn between wanting to defend Linda and acknowledging the frustration in the room. When she finally spoke, she admitted she'd always hoped Linda would change on her own, but realized that might not happen without some boundaries. That's when Cousin Megan proposed the idea of a new rule: no contribution, no leftovers. It was straightforward, fair, and felt like a good way to prevent future issues. At first, not everyone was on board. Aunt Karen worried the rule might seem too harsh and could escalate things with Linda. But after some discussion, the majority agreed it was necessary. Grandma, although hesitant, said she would support the rule if it meant keeping the peace. She suggested we give Linda a chance to participate in the next potluck under the new guidelines, hoping it might encourage her to contribute. The meeting wrapped up with everyone agreeing on the new rule, but there was an unspoken understanding that things with Linda were far from resolved. Sure enough, Linda found out about the rule within hours. Grandma, ever the mediator, had called her to explain it directly, hoping to soften the blow. Instead, Linda exploded. She accused the family of targeting her and called the rule ridiculous. According to Grandma, Linda said she'd never attend another potluck again and hung up. When word of Linda's reaction spread, the family's divide deepened. Some said it was better this way, that we didn't need her negativity at gatherings. Others felt bad, saying it wasn't worth losing a family member over a potluck. Grandma, caught in the middle, tried to keep the peace but seemed more stressed than ever. Meanwhile, Linda took to social media, posting vague updates about selfish people and betrayal disguised as fairness. The posts were peppered with hashtags like toxic family and boundaries matter. A few family members even liked her posts, which only added fuel to the fire. Despite the drama, I decided to focus on making the next potluck as smooth as possible. With the new rule in place, everyone seemed more motivated to contribute, and the group chat buzzed with excitement about the upcoming dishes. It felt like the family was slowly finding its footing again, even if Linda's absence loomed in the background. The whole situation left me with mixed emotions. On one hand, I felt vindicated knowing the family had finally taken a stand. On the other, I couldn't shake the feeling of guilt over how things had escalated. Linda might have brought this on herself, but she was still family. For now, though, the focus was on moving forward and keeping the next potluck drama-free. What happens next? Well, let's just say Linda wasn't done stirring the pot. But that's a story for another update. Update 3. After the family meeting and the new no contribution, no leftovers rule, things seemed to quiet down, at least on the surface. But Linda wasn't going to let it go that easily. Over the next few weeks, family members started getting texts from her, each with its own dramatic spin. Linda had a way of crafting stories that made her seem like the victim. Apparently, in her version, I had humiliated her in front of everyone at the last potluck and turned the family against her. She even hinted that the new rule was my idea to single her out. These texts started a wave of gossip. A few relatives sent me screenshots, some confused, others trying to confirm what really happened. One cousin, who'd always been closer to Linda, told me she claimed I had screamed at her and made her cry in front of Grandma. None of that happened, of course, but Linda wasn't exactly known for sticking to the truth. Fast forward to the next potluck. With Linda's dramatic exit still fresh in everyone's mind, no one expected her to show up. The group chat had been buzzing with plans for weeks, and the excitement seemed genuine. But about 30 minutes into the event, there she was. She walked in, holding a small store-bought fruit platter like it was a trophy. The room fell silent for a moment. Linda greeted everyone with an exaggerated cheerfulness that didn't match the tension in the air. She made sure to announce, loudly, that she'd brought something this time. Then her eyes landed on me, and for just a second, her smile faltered. It was clear her arrival wasn't just about the potluck. It was about making a statement. The atmosphere shifted immediately. Conversations that had been lively moments earlier turned awkward. People glanced between me and Linda, unsure of what to expect. She placed the fruit platter on the table with a flourish and settled into a seat, acting as though nothing had ever happened. It didn't take long for the passive-aggressive comments to start. While people served themselves, Linda mentioned how she hoped the potluck police would be satisfied this time. A few people laughed nervously, but it was clear she was aiming her remarks at me. Throughout the evening, she kept making little digs, joking about how she didn't want to get written up for her contribution. It was exhausting, but I focused on ignoring her and letting the evening play out. Some family members tried to smooth things over, engaging Linda in conversation to shift the focus. Others avoided her altogether, sticking to different rooms or clustering around the food table. Still, her presence was impossible to ignore. The tension simmered, with Linda occasionally throwing glances my way as if daring me to respond. The tipping point came when it was time for leftovers. Following the new rule, everyone who had brought something was welcome to pack up a portion to take home. Linda, true to form, made a show of packing only her fruit platter. She made sure everyone could see her carefully placing the untouched platter into her bag, loudly declaring, "I wouldn't want to break any rules." She left shortly after, announcing her departure with a dramatic sigh and an overly bright smile. Once she was gone, the mood lifted almost immediately. Conversations picked up again, and laughter filled the room. A few family members pulled me aside to thank me for standing my ground at the last potluck. One even admitted that they'd been dreading Linda's antics but felt the rule had made things better overall. But Linda wasn't done stirring the pot. A few weeks later, she announced she'd be hosting her own dinner at her house. Invitations went out selectively, with some family members noticeably left out, including me. The move didn't surprise anyone, but it created its own ripple of drama. Relatives started whispering about whether they should attend. Some didn't want to risk offending her, while others felt uncomfortable supporting an event that excluded certain family members. For me, the decision was easy. I wasn't going to play Linda's games. I focused instead on keeping our side of the family gathering stress-free and enjoyable. The new rule had set a precedent, and for the first time in years, the potluck felt fair and drama-free, at least when Linda wasn't involved. As for her, I couldn't predict what her next move would be, but one thing was clear: she wasn't ready to let this go. Whatever she had planned, I knew our family had already started to shift. The potluck tradition wasn't about Linda anymore. It was about everyone coming together, contributing, and enjoying the time we had with each other. And that, at least, felt like a victory. Update 4. Weeks after the last potluck, the family drama with Linda had started to settle, or so I thought. One afternoon, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. When I answered, it was Linda. Hearing her voice caught me off guard. She started by saying she wanted to clear the air and make things right. It was unexpected, considering her previous dramatic exit and her vague posts about family betrayal. She suggested we meet in person, just the two of us. Linda offered a small cafe downtown, saying it would be more private. The whole thing felt strange, but curiosity got the better of me. If Linda genuinely wanted to apologize, I figured it was worth hearing her out. The cafe was quiet when I arrived. Linda was already there, sipping a coffee. She greeted me warmly, almost too warmly, like nothing had happened. After a few minutes of small talk, she got to the point. Linda started by blaming me for the family tension, saying my actions at the potluck had pushed things too far. According to her, everything had been fine until I decided to call her out in front of everyone. I let her talk, not interrupting, but I wasn't about to let her rewrite history. When she finished, I calmly explained my side again. It wasn't about humiliating her, it was about fairness. Everyone else had been contributing for years while she showed up empty-handed and still took the most. I reminded her that the new rule wasn't aimed at her specifically, it was about keeping things fair for everyone. Linda nodded but didn't seem convinced. Then came what I can only describe as a half-hearted apology. She said, "I'm sorry if I upset you, but it didn't feel genuine." There was no acknowledgement of her pattern of behavior or the impact it had on the family. Instead, she pivoted to her real point, asking if we could move past this as a family, which, according to her, meant dropping the new potluck rule. That's when it became clear why she'd called me. It wasn't about mending fences, it was about getting the family back to how things were before. She mentioned how the rule made her feel targeted and argued it wasn't necessary anymore. I refused. I explained that the rule wasn't going anywhere, and that it had actually improved the potluck experience for everyone else. Linda didn't like that answer. She leaned in, her tone shifting, and gave me an ultimatum. If the rule stayed, she would cut ties with me completely. She claimed it wasn't out of spite, but because she couldn't be around such negativity. I didn't flinch. I told her that was her choice to make, but fairness had to come first. The conversation ended abruptly after that. Linda stood up, thanked me for meeting her, and left without another word. The fallout didn't take long to spread through the family. Linda, of course, told her side to anyone who would listen. Some relatives reached out to me saying they felt bad about how things had escalated. Others expressed relief, saying it was about time someone set boundaries with her. Grandma, ever the peacemaker, called me to check in. She wasn't happy about the divide but admitted she understood why the rule was necessary. As for Linda, she stopped attending family events altogether. Invitations went out for the next potluck, but she didn't respond. Her absence was noticeable at first, but the gatherings quickly felt lighter without her usual antics. Conversations flowed more easily, and everyone seemed more relaxed. Despite the newfound harmony, I couldn't shake a sense of loss. Linda and I had once been close, and now it felt like there was a permanent wall between us. Still, I knew backing down would have only enabled her behavior. Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't feel good, but it's necessary. Over time, the potluck tradition regained its footing. The new rule became just another part of the event, and everyone pitched in without issue. For the first time in years, it felt like the family was on the same page, at least, those who were still showing up. Linda, meanwhile, continued to host her own dinners, inviting a select few and leaving others out. It became her way of maintaining control, but fewer and fewer people attended. The novelty wore off quickly, and those who did go described the events as tense and over the top. In the end, the family found its balance again. Potlucks became about connection and sharing, free from the drama that had overshadowed them for so long. Looking back, I realized standing firm wasn't easy, but it was worth it. Sometimes fairness comes at a cost, but the peace it brings is priceless. Update 5. For months after our cafe meeting, Linda was completely silent. No dramatic texts, no cryptic social media posts, no surprise appearances at family events. It felt like she had quietly cut ties, and most of us assumed she'd decided to move on for good. The family potlucks continued without a hitch. The new rule became second nature, and the gatherings felt lighter and more enjoyable. Then, out of nowhere, Linda sent out invitations to a dinner at her house. Every family member got one, including me. The message was polished, almost formal, inviting us to an evening of reconnection and family unity. Linda wrote that she wanted to make things right and hoped we could all move forward. Naturally, the invitation sparked a lot of chatter. Some relatives were hopeful, thinking maybe Linda had turned over a new leaf. Others were skeptical, myself included. Still, curiosity got the better of us, and most of the family agreed to attend. When we arrived, it was clear Linda had gone all out. Her house was decorated like she was hosting a wedding reception. There were flowers, fairy lights, and even a professionally printed banner that read, "Family Forever." The dining table was covered in an extravagant buffet, but a quick glance made it clear much of it was store-bought. The desserts were straight from a bakery, and the main dishes looked like they'd come from a high-end deli. It was an impressive spread, but it felt staged. Linda greeted everyone with a smile that seemed almost too wide. She was wearing a dress that looked like it was meant for a gala, not a family dinner. After everyone had settled with plates of food, Linda stood up at the head of the table, holding a glass of champagne. She tapped it with a fork to get everyone's attention and launched into a grand speech about new beginnings and her desire to repair broken relationships. The speech started off genuine enough, but as she went on, it became clear she had an agenda. She made subtle jabs about putting family over rules and how love should come before fairness. A few people exchanged glances, but no one interrupted. Linda's tone was polished, like she'd rehearsed it in front of a mirror. Then came the big reveal. Linda announced that she was working on a family memoir and wanted everyone to contribute stories. She talked about how our family history was rich and deserved to be preserved for future generations. On the surface, it sounded like a heartfelt project, but something about it didn't sit right with me. As the evening progressed, Linda started approaching people individually, asking them for specific stories to include in her memoir. When she got to me, her question felt oddly specific. She asked for a story that highlighted the challenges of family dynamics and mentioned how she'd love for me to share my perspective on overcoming conflict. It felt like a trap, a way to twist the narrative in her favor. I gave a non-committal answer and moved on, but the interaction left me uneasy. By the end of the night, the family was once again divided. Some relatives praised Linda's effort, saying it took courage to host such an event. Others were more wary, questioning her motives. The skepticism proved justified when, as the party was winding down, I overheard Linda speaking to Grandma in the kitchen. She was asking for financial help to fund the memoir project. Apparently, Linda wanted to hire a ghostwriter and needed a substantial sum to get started. The next day, the family group chat erupted. Someone had leaked Linda's request, and the messages flew fast and furious. Some defended her, saying she was trying to do something meaningful. Others saw it as another ploy to benefit herself at the family's expense. Linda caught wind of the chatter and, true to form, lost her temper. She accused me of turning everyone against her again, even though I hadn't said a word in the chat. She stormed off from the conversation, posting yet another cryptic social media update about toxic relatives ruining her dreams. That dinner turned out to be the last straw for several family members. A few decided they were done with Linda's antics for good, cutting ties entirely. Others kept their distance, avoiding her events and interactions. The once close bond within the family was now fractured, and it was clear that Linda's efforts to reconnect had done more harm than good. Looking back, I realized the potluck confrontation was just the beginning. Setting boundaries with Linda may have been messy, but it was necessary. While the family may never fully mend, the precedent we set for fairness and mutual respect was worth it. And though Linda's chapter in our gathering seems to have come to a close, the rest of us have found a way to move forward, together.